CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. At least 42 people are killed in the latest Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, while Hamas fires more rockets into Israel in a seventh day of violence. As the conflict rages, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi calls for a ceasefire at an emergency UN Security Council meeting. And getting ready to open the doors. Indoor dining and entertainment is back on the menu in the UK from Monday.
We've got 2 floors to fill. I can't wait to fill them.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called for a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. His comments at the UN Security Council come as fighting stretched into a seventh day. Israeli airstrikes on Gaza killed dozens of Palestinians overnight, while Hamas fired more rockets into Israel. At least 181 Palestinians, including 52 children, have died since conflict erupted on Monday. 10 Israelis have been killed. European leaders are also calling for an end to the violence, the worst since 2014. Natalie Carney reports.
On Sunday, more disturbing images out of the Gaza Strip. At dawn, Israeli jets were said to have bombed a residential neighborhood, killing more than 30 people and wounding another 50, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health.
We arrived at the site of the bombing and started searching. We found injured people under the rubble and supplied them with oxygen straight away. We took out a woman and then we were able to take out a young man, and there are still others.
Israel says they are responding to the firing of rockets at them from Hamas militants in Gaza and will continue as long as needed to reach its aims. In Europe, Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas has called for both sides to end the violence and resume talks about a two-state solution, tweeting, "I cannot forget the reports about the ongoing violence, about fear and despair. This is a highly explosive mixture that can lead to unforeseeable consequences, also for the region as a whole. It is imperative that we prevent this from happening." Meanwhile, Pope Francis added to the voices of those calling for an end to hostilities from both sides, describing the deaths of children and other innocent people as terrible and unacceptable. Demonstrations against Israel's actions and what some see as a lack of international action continues across Europe, from Berlin to Rome to Paris.
The pseudo-international community, the UN, they are at their perhaps 200th UN resolution, but none is applied, no resolution is applied. There are no sanctions against Israel. It is this impunity that allows it to continue these massacres in Gaza today.
However, anti-Semitic agitation was also reported at some of the German protests, leading Germany's Interior Minister Horst Seehofer to issue a warning that those found to be perpetrating such hatred will feel the full force of the law.
The United Nations Security Council will be meeting on Sunday to discuss this most recent upsurge in violence between Israel and the Palestinians, while the foreign ministers of the European Union will get together via urgent video talks on Tuesday to discuss how the Union can best push forward and contribute to a de-escalation of violence in the region. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Munich.
Well, in a moment, we'll be going live to Stephanie Freed, who is in southern Israel. But first, we're going to talk to Noor Harazin, who is in Gaza. So, Noor, Israel's military has targeted the home of a Hamas leader. What more can you tell us?
Well, since the beginning of this escalation on the Gaza Strip, and Israel has been saying that they are targeting Hamas homes and Palestinian militants. However, what we are witnessing is a big number of casualties, children and women being killed, and arriving to the hospitals. Tonight was one of the most terrifying nights on the people of Gaza. It gets from bad to worse whenever this escalation is still going on. Today, more than 150 airstrikes were launched on the Gaza Strip. Many of these airstrikes targeted this street that where I am standing. It is called Al-Wahda Street, and again, it is one of the most densely populated streets in central Gaza city. There is many shops, there is hospitals, residential homes. The Israeli air raids targeted the roads itself, destroying the infrastructure. Many homes were targeted in the street, as you can see behind me, and there was tens of people inside it. The civil defense forces, the Palestinian civil defense forces, are still, until now and after around 15 hours from the attack, still trying to find survivors under the rubble. According to the Palestinian medical sources, 42 people were killed only in this attack, including 18 women and 10 children. This brings up the death toll here in Gaza over the past 7 days up to 159 people killed, including 60 children, while more than 1,300 were reported injured. On the other hand, Egypt opened its border with Rafah today, allowing hundreds of Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip. There is also unconfirmed news that in the upcoming days, Egypt will allow medical aid and humanitarian donations to enter the Gaza Strip.
Noor Harazin in Gaza, many thanks indeed. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the campaign against Gaza will take time and continue with full force. Let's go now to Stephanie Fried, who is in southern Israel. So, Stephanie, what's happening where you are?
Well, as you were saying, on Sunday, about the same time that the UN Security Council was meeting, Israel's Prime Minister, Israel's Chief of Staff, and the Defense Minister held a live address to the nation. And basically, the bottom line is no ceasefire, not for now. It could take a few more days, but they didn't give any sort of timeline. In his address, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the aim of this campaign, of the ongoing campaign, is to maximize efficiency, minimize casualties. But of course, we know there has been a tremendous amount of criticism over the numbers of casualties, specifically women, children in the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu said it will take time. He also talked about the support that he has from the international community, being happy for that support, and from the United States backing for Israel's right to defend itself. But also at the same time, we do know that there has been international pressure to achieve a ceasefire deal. Defense Minister Benny Gantz, he also talked about that international support, and he said that Israel's going to continue hitting Hamas, that Israel has a moral obligation to hit Hamas. For his part, the Chief of Staff, he talked about more stages ahead, and he talked about the damage that Israel has done to Hamas's underground network, which is the nerve center of Hamas, according to the Chief of Staff. So this is the latest that we're understanding from the top brass in Israel. There won't be any ceasefire, not today, probably not tomorrow. But we also know that there is pressure. There are mediators trying to get the two sides to come to some sort of ceasefire agreement.
And Stephanie, just before we began talking to you, we could hear and see some rocket fire taking place behind you. What was going on there?
What you saw behind me, this is an Iron Dome interceptor. It intercepts rockets. So what's happening right now is I can hear in my earpiece, I'm getting alerts that a good number, I would say a few dozen rockets have just been launched within the past 5-10 minutes from Gaza. And what you're seeing behind me are interceptors. So they fire interceptor rockets, anti-rocket rockets at the rockets to shoot them out of the sky, and that's what you were seeing. And those are placed strategically in vulnerable cities that Israel's military knows will be hit, are being hit, and they're mobile. They can also be moved. So sometimes if another city becomes vulnerable, these can be moved or others added to other locations. But they are throughout southern Israel, some near Tel Aviv, certainly because Tel Aviv has been a focal point, outlying areas of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, et cetera, et cetera.
Stephanie, good to talk to you. Stephanie Fried there in southern Israel. And in just a moment, we'll be live in New York as the UN Security Council meets virtually to discuss the escalating crisis. Well, still ahead here on The World Today. India's COVID-19 crisis is easing, but over 300,000 new cases are reported in a single day. And the spotlight's on transparent fashion, where labels share everything from their carbon footprint to how much workers are paid.
What does a sustainable future mean? What can we do with millions of tons of plastics, glass, food, clothes piling up on our planet? Ahead of this year's pivotal COP26 summit, CGTN Europe looks at what consumers, businesses, and governments are doing to offer a better world to generations to come. Trash or Treasure starts May 17th on CGTN Europe.
Welcome back. More now on our top story, the worsening conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza and attempts by the international community to de-escalate the violence. The United Nations Security Council has been holding a virtual meeting chaired by China in a bid to agree on a unified response. A short time ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, warned of the possible consequences if the violence didn't end.
The fighting risks dragging Israelis and Palestinians into a spiral of violence with devastating consequences for both communities and for the entire region. It has the potential to unleash an uncontainable security and humanitarian crisis and to further foster extremism, not only in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel, but in the region as a whole.
Well, let's go live now to Will Denslow, who's in New York. So, Will, we've just been hearing from China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. What did he have to say?
Well, Robin, the message from Wang Yi is that the priority should be to see a ceasefire and a stop to violence on the ground. Now, Wang Yi was critical of the United States, saying that it was regrettable that the US was the one nation that has stopped the UN Security Council over the past week from releasing a press statement. Now, the message from Wang Yi is that the United Nations Security Council should take action to what he describes as cooling down tensions. Let's have a listen.
The international community must take actions right now and make every effort to avert further deterioration of the situation, prevent the region from backsliding into turbulence, and protect people's lives. Justice is already running late, but it must not be forever absent. China supports a resumption of peace talks between Palestine and Israel on the basis of the two-state solution and as soon as possible. China supports the establishment of an independent state of Palestine that enjoys full sovereignty on the basis of the 1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital.
And earlier, representatives from both Palestine and Israel addressed the Security Council. Was there any sign of compromise?
Well, not so much. We heard from Gilad Erdan, who's Israel's permanent representative at the United Nations, said that the recent escalation in violence from Hamas was an attempt to grab power from the Palestinian authorities, questioning and the message from both Israel and the Palestinian representative was to really ask the Security Council members how they would react if they were in their shoes. So while there was very opposing attitudes to the Security Council, one unified message was really questioning those council members and how they'd react if they were in the prospective situations of both the Israelis and the Palestinians. Let's have a listen.
Israel is persecuting our people, committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Some may not want to use these words, war crimes and crimes against humanity, but they know they are true.
Hamas has murdered 10 people in Israel, Jews and Arabs, and hundreds of its rockets have fallen short upon the people of Gaza itself, killing Palestinian children and destroying Palestinian homes.
So there's certainly no signs of compromise as far as the Israelis and Palestinians are concerned. Plenty of condemnation from other council members, but one thing is very much a consistent theme we're hearing from council members so far out of this meeting, calling for an immediate de-escalation in the violence.
Will Denslow in New York, thank you. India's COVID-19 crisis is continuing with over 300,000 new cases reported in a single day. Oxygen remains in short supply. And as Abdullah Hashmi reports from New Delhi, morgues and crematoriums are struggling to keep up with demand for their services.
Morgues and crematoriums are overwhelmed and struggling to handle the number of dead coming in. New Delhi's largest cremation ground lies on the banks of the Yamuna River. The number of wood pyres has been significantly increased to handle the more than 80 bodies that come in every day. It's a sharp rise from 15 just a few months earlier. Delhi Gate Cemetery, a Muslim burial ground, is short of manpower and space to bury the dead.
It is much more than last year. Last year it was not like this, but this year there has been too much damage.
Insufficient infrastructure has led to parking lots being converted into cremation grounds. After navigating India's crumbling medical infrastructure, grief-stricken family members line up at these overburdened crematoriums to complete the last rites for their loved ones who have died from the virus.
My wife died April 25th. She suddenly had a fever 4 or 5 days back, and her condition worsened, but we kept her at home. Then her oxygen levels started dropping, so we shifted her to a hospital in Mayapuri, where we admitted her. Saturday, she was given plasma, but Sunday she passed away.
Mounting deaths, a shortage of oxygen, and a dwindling vaccine drive is the somber picture India now faces, and this has led to mass criticism of the government.
Overworked crematoriums and labour, which doesn't have time to feed itself or even breathe. Such is the condition of Delhi. If some people were to be believed, life does not lie in the hands of doctors or medicines. Rather now, it only lies in the hands of luck. Abdullah Hashmi, CGTN, Delhi.
Meanwhile, Nepal's healthcare system is struggling to cope with the rise in COVID-19 infections spilling across its border with India. Many hospitals in the capital, Kathmandu, say they can't take any more patients because of a lack of oxygen. There's also a severe shortage of beds, with many people receiving treatment on the floor, in corridors, or even outside on the street. A significant step in reopening after COVID restrictions will take place in the UK on Monday. Cafes, restaurants and bars will be allowed to serve customers inside their premises. More than 55 million people have received 1 or 2 doses of COVID vaccines so far. But there are still concerns about how virus variants could continue to spread. Yolo Abdavid looks at how businesses are preparing for the grand reopening.
Confidence is returning, and so are the customers. This cheese market is reopening for the first time since the UK's third lockdown 6 months ago. For nearby cafes and restaurants, income will increase as soon as they serve customers indoors.
It's 6 months of struggle, and we finally are able to serve customers inside.
maximising the space, allocating good, safe area. We've got 2 floors to fill. I can't wait to fill them.
In many ways, with so many people now vaccinated in the UK, people are socialising again and in greater numbers, not just in cafes and restaurants, but also in shopping areas and markets. But it's been a tough year. A tenth of restaurants won't be reopening, according to one survey, which says thousands of establishments across Britain have closed, with almost 10% fewer restaurants in operation than before the pandemic began. Those still open have had to adapt and often borrow to keep their businesses viable.
People have borrowed a lot of money. That debt needs to be serviced. So as we're moving forward, landlords are going to want rent that they've, there's a lot of things going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. And I think that's probably the most challenging time for businesses.
The UK government is keen to remove most COVID restrictions in 5 weeks' time, but it's been criticised for not responding sooner to the variant first found in India, which is spreading in parts of the UK. Ministers could find it difficult to reintroduce social distancing rules, with expectations rising that the UK is safe against COVID.
New variants are one of the biggest risks to this opening. Because of the speed of transmission of this one, it can really spread like wildfire amongst the unvaccinated groups. Hence, we need to get as many people vaccinated as possible.
For most of the past year, city centres have been quiet. Suburbs have fared better, with local, loyal clientele. But other costs will feature as soon as government help for businesses is phased out.
We are still possibly looking at starting to pay business rates from June onwards, maybe at a reduced rate. Furlough coming to an end at the end of the summer. So whatever savings we've had financially over the last years were depleted. So having to stand on your own from end of June onwards or July onwards is a scary thing.
May 17 is a big step for tens of thousands of businesses, hoping the virus will recede so their profits can return. Yolawap David, CGTN, London.
It's becoming known as transparent fashion, a growing trend, particularly involving smaller businesses who are putting it all out there for consumers to see, be it carbon footprint, a pricing breakdown, even the pay of the workers that make their clothes. Some believe this meets a demand in the market, but as Guy Henderson reports, it raises difficult questions for some.
This is a fashion shoot for a company called New Nomads. They're a New York startup whose very foundations are built on coolness with a conscience. Go to the website, it'll tell you how and where the company's products are made, even how the workers who made them are treated. This is one of a new breed of brands beginning to emerge on the global fashion scene right now, showing off a whole new level of transparency. This website offers vegan-only fashion, including New Nomads. They know exactly who they're taking on.
The kinds of brands that we sell tend to be really relatively small, independent, slow fashion brands. They're very purpose-driven, and they take a lot of pains to understand every element of their supply chain. I mean, they've created every element of their supply chain, and they're very transparent about it.
That's largely the antithesis of what's helped turn the fashion industry into a $2.4 trillion business in recent decades. The sector's drawn increasing criticism for generating profits that have come at a cost further down the supply chain, which often went unseen. Even now, says author Dana Thomas, many of the big names fall far short.
If they can make more money by being transparent, if they can make more money by being sustainable, if it's smart business, then they'll do it. But no business is going to change their business model simply because it's the right thing to do. They have to have economic incentive.
That means legislation, or perhaps just ostracization. Social media makes that easier. This prominent Instagram account, for example, exposes brands that copy others. A sign that calls for transparency in the fashion industry come in many different forms. Having fewer shoppers in store lately may have changed the demand for information.
Consumer habits have dramatically shifted during the course of the pandemic, so there's far fewer people packing into places like Oxford Street here in central London, for example, and far more purchases taking place online. Now, what that arguably means is that it's far easier for people to really take the time to look into a product and the company behind it. before they buy.
A handful of smaller fashion brands are laying down a challenge. Many of their much larger competitors remain reluctant to fully embrace. Guy Henderson, CGTN, London.
Despite concern about the pandemic, organisers of the delayed Olympic Games in Tokyo insist the event will go ahead as planned at the end of July. And athletes around the world are preparing for the competition. They include one event rider who's ready to canter to the stadium and leave his hoofprints on the competition. CGTN's Sun Lan reports.
With hoofprint to Tokyo as the slogan, Alex Hua Tian launched his journey to this year's Tokyo Olympic Games. This will be the third time he will represent China in a sport close to his heart.
That endless quest and endless search for that perfect moment of partnership between horse and rider. That moment is like a musician finding the perfect pitch.
Half Chinese and half British, Hua Tian is uniquely placed to represent China in a very British sport. At 18, he became China's first ever Olympic event rider in the Beijing Games. That event ended in the fall, but Hua Tian was determined not to trip in the same place twice. 8 years later, in 2016, he represented China again at the Rio Olympics and finished in the 8th place. This year, as he settles up for Tokyo, he won't be the only Chinese competitor anymore. For the first time, China is sending a team to compete in the sport.
I think it'll be very exciting. I'm looking forward to it. You know, normally I'm in the Olympic Village as part of the Chinese delegation, but doing my own thing, because with horses you're travelling at strange times. No team, just me. And this time it will be very nice to be together.
Navigating a new team and pandemic restrictions means this year's competition is not going to be easy. The huge logistical challenges brought on by global lockdown mean that athletes have to keep their minds and their schedules flexible.
The pandemic's had huge implications for preparation for the Olympics, mainly in terms of uncertainty. Uncertainty about the Olympics happening, uncertainty about our preparation competitions. Many competitions have been cancelled, many competitions have been replaced.
To reduce possible infection, Japan has banned overseas spectators, meaning the stadiums could be emptier than usual. However, this could be a bonus for some participants, those with 4 legs.
And actually, if the stadiums are empty, in some ways that takes away a huge element of and huge challenge from what we're trying to do. And that will help some riders whose horses are more worried about the atmosphere, and it will not help riders whose horses are very secure.
Unusual times, unusual games. Despite the difficulties, Alex and his horses are ready to gallop all the way to Tokyo and overcome the challenges, one hurdle at a time. Sun Lan, CGTN.
And our top story again. At least 42 people have been killed in the latest Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, while Hamas fires more rockets into Israel in a 7th day of violence. As the conflict rages, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi calls for a ceasefire at an emergency UN Security Council meeting. Well, that's it for the world today. Thanks very much for watching. We're available on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and on the CGTN app. And from all the team here in London, goodbye.